Young filmmakers worldwide are grappling with their realities by researching, questioning, and dissecting what they see to expose social ills. Resistance using the power of film. We meet up with 5 filmmakers whose themes include poverty, social unrest, alienation from nature, and the legacy of war. Inadelso Cossa uses his camera to fight suppression of the past. He wants to wake up his home country, Mozambique.
I know it's crazy to think that images can change people, but I believe so, otherwise I will be doing this.
American director Sabaah Folayan confronts systemic racism in the U.S.
A government should never be against its people. A government should never be treating its people as enemy combatants.
How alienated are we becoming from the natural world? This is a topic that occupies Peruvian animator Alois.
We forget that we come from nature and that when we die, we go back to nature.
Lebanese cameraman Christopher Aoun and German film editor Konstantin Bock collaborated on a haunting film about child poverty in Lebanon.
Seeing those things on set every day, that's what makes you want to make that movie, because it's something that the world doesn't see or doesn't want to see.
Resistance, young filmmakers aiming to change the world, in our Arts.21 Special. We met up with the 5 film activists at Berlinale Talents 2019, the platform for young filmmaking talent at the Berlin Film Festival, the Berlinale. Inadelso Cossa is from Mozambique. He was born in the capital, Maputo. A bitter civil war raged in Mozambique for nearly 16 years. Starting in the late 1970s, 2 opposing political groups, the Mozambique Liberation Front and the Mozambican National Resistance, fought for power. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed. Cossa was a child at the time.
Back in the days, we used to spend the summer in my grandmother's village, and I remember being awake in the middle of the night, and hear bombings and gunshots all over, and I asked my grandmother, what is this noise? And she said, it's only fireworks.
A peace accord was signed in 1992, but the history of the bloody period has not been dealt with. Instead, it has been repressed. That's one of the demons Cossa confronts in his films.
Como nos westerns americanos, fazia eu duelo com o vilão, o tempo. Desafiava eu o tempo. Era preciso documentar os vestígios da guerra, lembrar-me de como era este lugar, curar esta ferida aberta, este trauma de violência e de terror.
KARINGANA, The Dead Tell No Tales. It's a short film which is basically a story of anti-hero who is going back to his home village to encounter himself with his memory, or to listen to stories of the old Yamba, a storyteller, but finds him deaf and mute. And then he realized he has no one else to tell him stories.
O velho continua sentado no mesmo lugar, à espera deste dia. Yamba, o contador de histórias, agora não fala, não ouve. A guerra o tornou surdo e mudo.
It's more of a metaphor on how people, or how the storytellers are kind of missing or disappearing in African societies, where we have mostly the storytellers as the people who pass memories through generations to generations. And it's also a way to revive this tradition of telling stories around the campfire, which is getting lost in Mozambique.
From Mozambique to the Brazilian jungle, this is the setting of Alois de Leo's animated film. His theme is respect for nature, the rhythm of life. Everything is part of a cycle. He wants to stop the elders' stories from disappearing from collective memory. De Leo, who was born in Peru, uses his drawings to pose key questions.
The starting point of animation is imagination. It's in your head, and I think that triggers many things in the audience when you don't have a real subject in front of the camera. We of Giants is about the cycle of life and the perception of death. It follows the story of Okira, a little indigenous girl who must understand and accept the death of her grandfather.
In an ancient ritual, the grandfather will make his way into the next world playing the flute. He will die, but Okira can't accept this and steals the flute.
Most of the films that I do revolve around death. And the reason is that we don't pay enough attention to nature, I think, to the earth itself. I think the earth is a character in everything we do, the nature, the place we live, the air we breathe. And I am not a documentary filmmaker, and so I wanted to do it in a poetical, passionate way.
In the course of the short film, Okira learns to accept the cycle of life. Music plays a major role in Way of Giants. Peruvian musician Tito La Rosa agreed to work on the project. His improvised flute sounds give the film its atmospheric soundtrack.
He's a sound healer. I explained him what the film was about, and he was very moved because he's 60-something years old and he had just had a child. So he was very moved because he identified with the grandfather of the film, and then he performed the tracks, and we just kind of did it very organically.
Alois de Leo's award-winning film has been shown at some 150 festivals worldwide.
We forget that we come from nature and that when we die, we go back to nature. And I wanted to show that in a poetical way, in a scenario where we are really close to nature. So I chose an indigenous tribe living amongst giant trees to represent that and represent the tree as something growing in the place of the person who dies.
And his transformation into a tree, life and death merge into a harmonious circle of nature. Sabaah Folayan finds her themes in the here and now. The American filmmaker's work is driven by rage and resistance. She grew up in Los Angeles, and her childhood was characterized early on by a sense of differences, of exclusion, and insurmountable barriers.
When I was about 8 or 9, I started to see some of the problems that exist in American society. And I was really confused and curious, you know, why were all the Black people in one area and white people in a different area? And why do all the Black people, you know, work at the grocery store and not at the bank? And, you know, these kind of questions came into my mind at a really early age.
But treat us like humans and not like animals. Don't beat us like dogs when you do arrest us.
2014, demonstrators and police face off in the streets of Ferguson, Missouri.
We will continue to fight for our rights.
Michael Brown Jr. was killed. He was 18 years old and he was gunned down by a police officer.
I know you talk about this shit with your friends, family, all that. You say how you really feel when you're around your friends and family.
You ain't gotta protect her from us. We gotta protect her from you.
And I get out there and it's just, I mean, total chaos. The police had, you know, huge rifles that they were shooting rubber bullets and tear gas and pepper spray, and people are running and protesting in their tanks.
Tear gas and shooting people with rubber bullets.
They're shooting!
Folayan says she couldn't help but be affected by the growing tensions while filming. She aims to reveal systemic racism in the U.S., so her documentary is intentionally one-sided. Yet it also shows the power of peaceful protest.
One of the scenes from Whose Streets that sticks in my mind the most is the night when it was announced that Darren Wilson would not be indicted for killing Mike Brown Jr.
Our investigation has been completed. The grand jury determined that no probable cause exists to file any charge against Officer Wilson on each of the 5 indictments.
No one had any faith by that point in the system. But how were people going to react? Were there going to be riots, or was it going to be peaceful protesting? From the first day that we filmed, we realized that this was something, that this was important, and that we had to keep going.
She was 6 when the movement first started. Day 1, she was with me. There were a lot of questions about why we were out there, and it was my opportunity to educate her on how things have never been right for Black folks in America, and this is just another example of that, and this is what we have to do.
The director got close to the activists, showing us their daily lives and how unsettled they were by the situation in the U.S. The documentary received much attention after premiering at the Sundance Film Festival in 2017.
I want her to think for herself, to resist and participate in democracy. That is your right, and that cannot be taken away from you.
We have not, as a country, responded to the horrors of our history, and as a result, those ideologies have continued to live underground, and now they're starting to come to the surface with a president who is sympathetic to them. And, you know, people who have been having to kind of claw their way up from the bottom are now at a point where it's still a struggle, but we have enough of a voice that we can speak for ourselves.
But what about those who can't yet speak for themselves, who are too young and vulnerable? The Oscar-nominated feature film CAPERNAUM focuses on children who are struggling just to survive, living in poverty in the slums of Beirut. German editor Konstantin Bock and Lebanese cameraman Christopher Aoun had a major influence on the film's look. We caught up with them at Berlinale Talents. CAPERNAUM shows us children with no childhood. It's the life story of 12-year-old Zain.
انت موقوف تاريخ 15 حزيران ما بتنفذ عقوبة، عارف ليه؟
لأنه طعنت واحد ابن كلب بالسكين.
طعنت واحد بالسكين.
ايه وابن كلب.
كمان؟ مصر عليا؟ ايه بدون ضحك بالقاعة. شو هالقصة؟ شو هالدوشة اللي عملها؟ إعلام وصحافة وبعدت وراهم على السجن. عارف ليش أنت هون؟
ايه نعم.
ليه؟
بدي اشتكي على أهلي.
ليه بدك تشكي على أهلك؟
هم خلفوني.
A boy who wishes he'd never been born. But he's not alone. The filmmakers spent 3 years doing research for this film. and children's suffering was omnipresent.
It was the moment when you realized that the fiction that we're doing, that the reality is surpassing the fiction that we're doing, and it made everyone realize how important this fictionalized version that we're creating here is, and that these topics do need to be talked about.
You would see those kids on the streets everywhere. You would see families also between lanes and like on the highway. You're just used to ignore them. You just treat them like animals or like ghosts that don't exist, but they're everywhere.
In the film, Zane's only close relationship is with his 11-year-old sister. Then his parents sell her off to a grown man for a few chickens. Zane runs away, the start of an odyssey into the unknown. He finds a home with Rahil, an Ethiopian woman living illegally in Lebanon with her baby, Jonas. Theirs is a life on the run without papers or rights. But it's not the story which makes CAPERNAUM so unusual. It's how director Nadine Labaki and her cameraman Christopher Aoun tell it, in a way that's raw, direct, and real. Much is shot from a child's perspective.
We had developed a rig which helped us have the camera lower, so I would hold it at my waist, but the camera would be even lower. But still, I had to knee down, and a lot of times the camera had to be almost over, like a few centimeters over the floor.
For director Labaki, it was important that the story be as authentic as possible. The actors, all amateurs cast on the street, essentially play themselves. In real life, Zane fled Syria with his family.
The story was changed in the making. That's why Nadine wanted to have me editing on set next to her to influence, to see the film come to life in real time, because it was shot chronologically, and we could decide, we had the freedom to decide on a day-to-day basis, what are we going to shoot next?
The shoot took 6 months and produced more than 500 hours of material. In 2018, CAPERNAUM debuted at Cannes, where it won the jury prize. This year, it was nominated for an Oscar as Best Foreign Language Film. In the film, Zane cares for Rahil's baby, Jonas. Their interaction is very moving. But for Christopher Aoun and Konstantin Bock, awards aren't so important. They want to change things.
It's easy to blame people, but it's much harder to understand why they act the way that they act. What is wrong with the system that makes them act this way? How were they brought up to act in this way? And that's something that was very important to us in the film, to not easily point fingers and to blame his parents in the story, for example, but to make people understand that this is part of a bigger issue, and it's first and foremost a structural problem.
Inadelso Cossa also shows why people act the way they do. He hopes his films will find an audience in his homeland, that Mozambicans will be ready to remember their past.
I'm not a political filmmaker, because your first mission is to tell a story that you're passionate about. But of course, I realize that my films are always related to some common theme, which is memory and collective memory, and specifically about my country, Mozambique.
This was also the implied theme of his first feature-length documentary, A Memory in 3 Acts. Here, eyewitnesses recall history that doesn't appear in Mozambican schoolbooks.
Foram à casa dele, a população, se calhar, nem são aqueles, são os familiares, nem são presos políticos. Então foram à casa dele logo, mataram e disseram à mulher: ai de vocês se chorar, ai de vocês se usar a roupa de luto. A dir também. Ai se você chorar, ai se você usar a roupa de luto.
Elements of our colonial history that people tend to bury, and I was able to awake them and and bring them into a story, a film.
Nós só descobrimos que o meu pai era da PIDE através da revista Tempo, em 1974. Então as pessoas começam já a mandar-me parar. Você afinal não a xingar mundo, vive numa casa grande, madeira 5, afinal vosso pai matava pessoas.
A Memory in 3 Acts has been screened at festivals worldwide and showered with prizes. But Cossa's greatest wish has yet to come true.
The audience that I made this film for, it's Mozambique, and they didn't see the film yet. I don't have cinema to show the film, like to make a commercial screening, but I really want the people from Mozambique to see that film, and I want to have their feedbacks, because I believe it's a very important film to show there. And I'm working on that. I will try, even if I need to show it like an outdoor cinema or make some underground screening.
Alois de Leo doesn't face such distribution issues. The Peruvian lives and works in Brazil. Unlike Mozambique, Brazil has plenty of cinemas. Way of Giants is a short that runs just 12 minutes. De Leo is now preparing to make his first animated feature, but is struggling to find financing, partly due to Brazil's recent change of government.
The situation in Brazil is a little bit tricky. We have a new government who is far right, so we are not sure what is going on. Nobody really knows what's going on. It's kind of like a wild card. And one of the first things the president did was close the Ministry of Culture, and among other things. But lucky for us, the film business is very strong in Brazil, so I don't think it's something that is just going to end. And even if they try to do that, I'm sure we will revert it. We will fight for it.
Sabaah Folayan plans to keep fighting too. The success of Whose Streets has only strengthened her conviction. Since Donald Trump took office, she's spoken out against sexism as well.
I started to really notice the difference in the way that men and women are treated and the things that we have access to and the culture, and hearing all these stories from women about assault and how common it is, and even realizing situations that I've been in that have been extremely uncomfortable, that I didn't even know that I should be able to speak up for myself, because no one had ever taught me, how to set those boundaries or taught me that I was right to feel uncomfortable.
Her next project will be a feature. She worked on the idea while taking part in Berlinale Talents.
It's about a young woman who gives motivational speeches during the apocalypse. And the idea came to me because I feel like it's sort of my story in a way. After doing Whose Streets and going around the country speaking about the film during this age of Trump, finding myself having to dig deep to find what is hopeful and where the possibilities, when people were feeling so frustrated and so afraid and so down about the political landscape. And so that inspired me to think, what if we took this to the extreme?
Konstantin Bock and Christopher Aoun didn't win an Oscar, but CAPERNAUM has made a real impact, and for them, that's better than any award. Refugee Zain now has a promising future. The UNHCR resettlement program has found him and his family a new home in Norway.
Zane's parents, him and his 3 siblings, are living in Hammerfest in the north of Norway now. And it's incredible, he's going to school for the first time in his life. He's learning Norwegian, he has a passport. I mean, he's registered for the first time in his life. He has a birth certificate that he didn't have before.
So our 5 filmmakers plan to keep on making films that could change the world.
I don't propose to offer answers with my films. I'm not trying to teach anyone anything. I'm just trying to be brave enough to let people see the questions that I'm asking and the things that I'm grappling with.
We make films because we want them to resonate with people, whatever that resonance is.
It's always a good moment to do animation. Animation it's a craft.
I believe that the 1 hour we stand in the cinema and we watch a film, I mean, a film that really matters, we absorb, a piece of truth that we will take home and we will reflect on tomorrow.